It started like any other low-profile court hearing routine, quiet, barely a footnote in the weekly legal docket. Most of the attendees didn't even know Senator John Kennedy was involved. It wasn't supposed to be a spectacle, and Kennedy had no intention of making headlines. He was there as a witness, offering character testimony in a seemingly simple civil case. A young, black veteran suing the police department for excessive force during a traffic stop gone wrong. The public barely knew about it, and few reporters had bothered to show up. The courtroom was half empty. The air was still. Everyone thought this would be over in under an hour. But then Detective Gerald Hawkins walked in. Known inside the department for his aggressive tactics and a long list of borderline misconduct reports, Hawkins had a reputation and not a good one. He'd been suspended twice, once for roughing up a teenager, and again for falsifying a report. Internal Affairs had investigated him 5 times, but he always found a way to slip through the cracks. Till now, Hawkins strutted into the courtroom like he owned it. Sunglasses on, chewing gum, and smirking like a man who believed the system would protect him no matter what. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Senator Kennedy, seated calmly near the plaintiff's attorney. That's when the mood shifted. There was something about Kennedy that got under Hawkins' skin. Maybe it was the senator's history of confronting law enforcement abuses. Maybe it was the viral clip from a Senate hearing 2 years ago where Kennedy grilled a police chief so hard it made national news. Or maybe Hawkins simply didn't. Like the idea of someone with power and principle calling him out. Whatever it was, Hawkins couldn't contain it. As he took the stand, he barely glanced at the judge. His confidence was unnerving. He answered the first few questions with sharp, clipped responses, showing no remorse, no emotion. Then it happened. During cross-examination, the plaintiff's attorney mentioned Senator Kennedy by name, referring to his statement as a key part of the case. That's when Hawkins snapped, with the whole courtroom watching. Hawkins leaned forward into the mic and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, please. That hillbilly senator. Y'all really bringing in the Deliverance cast to talk about? Police work." The room froze. The judge's eyebrows rose. The plaintiff's mouth dropped open. Even the bailiff looked stunned. But Kennedy didn't flinch. He just tilted his head slightly, like a man who had seen too many small men with big egos try the same thing before. He didn't speak. Not yet. Because what came next would be so much bigger than a comeback. The judge asked Hawkins to clarify his remark, but the detective only doubled down. "I'm just saying," he smirked.
Letting a politician with a southern drawl tell cops how to do their job. Might as well let the
Duck Dynasty boys rewrite the Constitution. It was supposed to be funny. No one laughed. The court reporter stopped typing. The silence was thick, suffocating, and then, in just 12 seconds, everything changed. The judge slowly turned to Kennedy and, with an unusual firmness in his tone, said, "Senator Kennedy, do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Kennedy stood slowly. No papers, no notes. Just a measured breath and that distinct southern calm he was known for. Adjusted his jacket, looked directly at Detective Hawkins, then turned to the judge. His voice, though soft, carried weight, a slow Louisiana drawl that somehow quieted the room even more. "Your Honor," Kennedy began, "I had no intention of speaking out today beyond my testimony. But when a public servant entrusted with enforcing the law walks into a court of law and decides to spit on it with arrogance and ignorance, I believe silence becomes complicity." He let that hang for a moment. Hawkins scoffed, crossing his arms. But Kennedy wasn't finished, not even close. "I was asked here to provide a character reference, but I believe the character that needs referencing today is not the plaintiff's, but that of the man in uniform who just insulted not only a witness, but this very court." Kennedy turned to face Hawkins fully now. "You see, Detective Hawkins," he continued, "when you mock a U.S. Senator in open court, what you're really doing is mocking the people who sent him here. You didn't insult me, you insulted every hardworking voter who believes in justice, fairness, and dignity. And you did it with a smirk, like this courtroom was your playground." At this point, even the stenographer stopped typing just to listen. Kennedy's eyes narrowed slightly. You called me a hillbilly. You referenced Duck Dynasty, as if to suggest that anyone with a Southern accent is automatically ignorant or unfit to speak on justice. Let me tell you something, son. I've spent the last 30 years learning, debating, and writing the very laws you're sworn to uphold. I've questioned Supreme Court nominees, authored legislation on criminal reform, and yes, Eve grilled corrupt cops in more hearings than you've attended traffic court. Hawkins shifted in his seat. Suddenly less sure of himself, Kennedy went on. I may speak with a drawl, but I read federal code like scripture. I may quote Mark Twain, but I carry Black's Law Dictionary in my briefcase. And I may believe in forgiveness, but I also believe in accountability. The judge leaned forward slightly now, its expression unreadable. Kennedy turned to him respectfully. Your Honor, I do not ask for special treatment or dramatics. I simply ask that this court remember that justice is not served when those tasked with protecting it, turn it into a punchline. The integrity of this courtroom demands more than smirks and slurs. The room was dead silent. Detective Hawkins, who only minutes ago looked invincible, now sat frozen, his face drained of color. Even his attorney looked uncomfortable. Then came the moment no one expected. The judge looked over his glasses and asked, "The court clerk, please read back Detective Hawkins's last two responses, word for word." She did. Slowly, clearly. The racial undertone, the sarcasm, the deliberate mockery of the legal process, it was all there in the transcript, mortalized in black and white. Then the judge did something no one in that room will ever forget. He picked up his gavel and said, I am issuing a contempt hearing immediately. And I'm placing Detective Hawkins under review for conduct unbecoming of a law enforcement officer in a court of law.
Ow!
The courtroom gasped. Hawkins blinked. For the first time in years, he realized something terrifying. His badge wouldn't save him this time. And just like that, a case that was supposed to be simple routine had exploded into a full-blown courtroom reckoning, but the fallout had only just begun. Outside the courthouse, local reporters who'd been covering a completely unrelated case were suddenly scrambling to understand what had just happened. Few court spectators ran out and immediately began dialing journalists, friends, and local activists. One of them even tweeted a single sentence that started the fire. Senator John Kennedy just took a racist cop to school. Courtroom silent. Judge furious. You'll want to see this. That tweet? It hit 10,000 shares within the hour. And someone one knows who to this day had been secretly recording on their phone. Not just the moment Hawkins made his deliverance comment, but Kennedy's entire response. Within 47 minutes, the footage was on X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and it read its front page. What had started as a routine civil case was now the most talked about moment in the country. People couldn't get enough. Kennedy's calm but devastating rebuttal was being hailed as one of the greatest unscripted courtroom speeches since Atticus Finch. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't name-called. He had simply told the truth. And that truth hit like a freight train. Major networks picked it up by evening. CNN ran it under the headline, Kennedy eviscerates cop who called him a hillbilly. Fox News called it courtroom shock. John Kennedy defends the South, defends the law. Even apolitical channels like C-SPAN shared it with one simple caption, watch, this is what integrity sounds like. But while the internet was celebrating Kennedy, Detective Hawkins was getting crushed. The department's Internal Affairs Office opened a formal inquiry the same day. Their phones were ringing off the hook calls from citizens, civil rights, attorneys, even retired officers who had long suspected Hawkins was more than just aggressive. His union reps tried to downplay it, calling it a moment of bad judgment, but that excuse didn't hold water, not after years of warning. Signs, not after 5 previous investigations. And certainly not after the judge publicly called him out in court, within 48 hours. The mayor's office issued a statement expressing deep concern over the conduct exhibited in open court. The police chief followed shortly with one of his own, more direct this time. No officer, regardless of rank or seniority, is above the dignity of the law. By day 3, Hawkins was placed on unpaid administrative leave pending disciplinary review, but the most painful blow wasn't from the department. It came from his family, his teenage daughter, who had seen the viral clip at school, posted on Instagram. "I used to admire my dad. Not anymore." That post alone got 200,000 likes. Public opinion turned swiftly and brutally. Every old complaint against him, once ignored or buried, was being re-examined. The story triggered a wave of ex-officers and whistleblowers stepping forward, anonymously or otherwise. Some described cover-ups. Others shared how internal investigators were pressured to close cases involving him. The picture that emerged wasn't of a bad day, but of a man who had spent years believing he was untouchable. And that illusion, it had shattered on camera. Meanwhile, John Kennedy refused to give a single interview. When asked by a reporter outside the courthouse if he had anything to say about the firestorm his remarks had caused, he simply replied, "I said what needed saying. Let the law handle the rest." Classic Kennedy. But the storm wasn't over, because what happened next inside that courtroom, the evidence, the testimony, Kennedy's return to the stand would finally answer the biggest question of all. Could justice actually be served? Before Detective Hawkins ran his mouth and Senator Kennedy lit the internet on fire, the case itself had been flying under everyone's radar. At its core, it was a civil suit, one man, 26-year-old Army veteran named Marcus Tillman, suing the city and police department for excessive force. Marcus had no political connections, no fancy legal team, and certainly no media buzz. Just a shattered wrist, 2 cracked ribs, and a haunting dashcam video that still hadn't been played in court. But after Kennedy's courtroom moment exploded online, everything changed. By the next hearing, the courtroom was packed. Not just with press and spectators, but with activists, civil rights attorneys, and even to sitting congresswomen who wanted to observe the proceedings firsthand. The entire legal world was now watching what had been, until days ago, just another fight against a broken system. And then came the evidence. The plaintiff's lawyer, a quiet, persistent woman named Nadia Carter, rose to her feet with a small remote in her hand and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to submit dashcam footage from the night of the incident." The judge nodded, the lights dimmed, and what played next stunned even those who thought they'd seen everything. The footage began with Marcus being pulled over for a broken taillight. He's calm, polite, hands on the wheel, following every instruction. Then a second unit arrives, Detective Hawkins. In under 40 seconds, the tone shifts completely. Hawkins pulls Marcus out of the car, slams him onto the pavement, and yells, "Stop resisting." Even though Marcus is lying face down, hands behind his back, visibly confused, the video shows no struggle, no aggression. Just a man overwhelmed and frightened. At one point, Marcus tries to speak. "Sir, I'm a veteran, I'm not." But before he can finish, Hawkins knees him in the ribs. The courtroom was silent, except for the heavy breathing of Hawkins, captured clearly on the dashcam's audio. As the footage ended, gasps echoed through the gallery. The judge, visibly disturbed, asked Hawkins if he had anything to say in response. His attorney intervened, stammering out a request for recess, but it was too late. The damage was done, and then came. Kennedy called back to the stand. This time, not for character testimony, but as a first-hand observer of systemic failures. He spoke quietly at first, outlining his years studying criminal justice, including time spent helping reform the very laws that govern excessive force. But then, in a moment that gripped the nation once again, he turned directly to the jury and said, "Marcus Tillman didn't ask to be a symbol. He didn't want to be a headline. He served his country, came home, and got thrown to the pavement by someone who saw a threat instead of a human being. And that should scare all of us, because if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone." That clip, too, went viral. It became a rallying cry, played on cable news, shared by senators and celebrities, even turned into a campaign ad for police reform. And Detective Hawkins, his fate was all but sealed. But as the trial entered its final days, a deeper question began to emerge. Was this just one bad cop, or the symptom of something bigger, something embedded? If the dashcam video shook the courtroom, what came next shattered its foundation. The footage had done more than just reveal the truth about Marcus Tillman's violent arrest. It triggered something much larger. A sense of collective outrage. Yes, but also a quiet sense of relief. Relief from those who'd been waiting sometimes for years for someone like Kennedy to force the system to look in the mirror. And suddenly, people started coming forward. The first was a retired officer named Ben Carruthers. He'd served with Hawkins for 6 years, no longer under the pressure of departmental politics. Carruthers submitted a sworn affidavit to the court in it. He detailed how Hawkins had routinely escalated minor stops into confrontations, how his reports often didn't match witness statements, and how he always seemed to target young black men. Carruthers admitted he regretted not speaking out sooner, saying fear kept us all quiet. After seeing that courtroom moment, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. His statement made the evening news. The second was even more devastating. Single mother named Deanna Hughes, who worked as a nurse at a local clinic, testified that Hawkins had assaulted her teenage son 3 years earlier. They had filed a complaint, but it mysteriously disappeared from the system. She had never pursued it, she said, because the message was clear. The department protects its own. Now with cameras rolling, she told the court, I knew no. One would believe a black mother from the East Side, till now. The judge allowed her to speak, even though her case wasn't on the docket. The courtroom was silent. Many people visibly shaken. That one testimony triggered a chain reaction by the end of the week. 11 more individuals had come forward, each with their own story involving Hawkins. Some were former suspects, others were witnesses. A few were even former officers or clerical staff who had handled internal reports. Patterns emerged, complaints that were opened and suddenly closed, body camera footage that had gone missing, testimonies rewritten under pressure. The city had a crisis on its hands. It wasn't just a rogue detective anymore. It was systemic Rotand. The courtroom had become a stage for its exposure. Senator Kennedy, though not required to attend every hearing, turned quietly one morning and sat in the back Rona press. No fanfare, just a presence. A statement. Without words, he watched as more people found their voice. Victims who had been ignored, dismissed, or threatened were finally being heard. Kennedy was later asked by a journalist why he kept showing up. He replied, "'Cause if the people are brave enough to speak truth in that courtroom, then the least I can do is sit there and listen." That quote, it ran across the ticker on every major cable news network by now. The nation was watching not just a trial, but a reckoning. Protests grew outside the courthouse, not chaotic ones, peaceful, powerful, filled with signs like "Justice for Marcus," "We believe the victims," and "Fix the blue wall." Even the mayor, once hesitant to wade into police affairs, made a rare public appearance outside the court steps and said, "What happens inside this courtroom will shape the future of this city's justice system." And he was right, because as the testimonies piled up, one question began circling the judge, the jury, and the nation at large. If this is what one officer got away with, how many others are doing the same? The trial had reached its boiling point. Nearly every seat in the courtroom was filled. Outside, the streets were crowded with citizens, reporters and activists, all anxiously waiting for the outcome. The case of Marcus Tillman v. the City Police Department was no longer just about one man's broken bones. It was now a trial of conscience for an entire system. The evidence was damning. The testimonies, over a dozen of them, were impossible to ignore. And Detective Hawkins? He was no longer strutting. Gone was the arrogance, the gum-chewing, the sarcastic smirks. In his place sat a man hunched over the defense table, red-eyed, pale, and visibly broken. Still, despite all the emotion and publicity, the courtroom held its breath as the jury filed back in after 11 hours of deliberation. The judge turned to the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" A pause, then a nod. "Yes, Your Honor, we have," the courtroom said. The foreperson stood and began to read. "In the matter of Marcus Tillman v. Detective Gerald Hawkins and the City Police Department, we, the jury, find the defendants liable for all charges, including use of excessive force, violation of civil rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Gasps, cheers, and then ... silence. It wasn't over, the jury awarded Marcus Tillman $8.4 million in damages, compensatory and punitive, sending a shockwave through the room. But even more shocking was what happened next. The judge cleared his throat. This court is not merely a venue for resolving damages, it is a guardian of the public trust. And in this instance, that trust was violated not only by the defendant, but by the system that allowed him to thrive for so long. I hereby order an independent federal inquiry into the practices of the City Police Department with a full audit of all excessive force claims over the last 10 years. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just a verdict, it was a judgment on one. The system, as the noise died down, one final drama unfolded. Detective Hawkins rose to speak. It was unplanned. His lawyer looked alarmed, but the judge allowed it. I thought I was doing my job, Hawkins mumbled, voice trembling. I thought being tough meant being in control. I didn't realize. I didn't know it had gone. This far? Then he looked directly at Marcus Tillman. I'm sorry, but Marcus, seated calmly beside his attorney, didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't frown. He just looked forward, breathing deeply, perhaps realizing that this wasn't about apologies, it was about accountability. And then, from the back row, John Kennedy stood. Again, no words. Just a moment of silent recognition between the senator and the young veteran, whose courage had just shaken a city. After court adjourned, Kennedy walked outside into a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed. Microphones reached for him from all angles. But when asked for a statement, he kept it short. Justice isn't supposed to be rare. It's supposed to be the standard. That clip became the defining quote of the entire trial. And the verdict? It set off a wave across the country. Police departments in other cities began re-examining old complaints. Legislators began drafting new oversight bills. Even members of Congress cited the case in upcoming debates on police accountability. But the story wasn't quite finished. In the weeks that followed the verdict, headlines slowly began to shift. The cameras disappeared. The crowds outside. The courthouse thinned. Reporters moved on to the next scandal. But for the people at the heart of the case, Marcus Tillman, Detective Hawkins, and Senator John Kennedy, their lives had changed forever. Let's start with Marcus. The $8.4 million award made national news, but Marcus never saw it as a windfall. He donated nearly a quarter of it to organizations that support veterans of color and used the rest not to escape but to invest in his hometown. He opened a community center called Second Salute just blocks away from the courthouse where his name became famous. The center offered trauma therapy, legal aid, mentorship for at-risk youth. When asked by a journalist why he didn't just move to a bigger city and start fresh, Marcus replied, "This city broke me. But it's also where I found justice. I'm not running. I'm rebuilding." His quiet resolve inspired many, including lawmakers, who invited him to testify before Congress about his experience. That testimony played a role in passing a federal bill requiring mandatory body camera audits for police departments, receiving federal funding. One man's case had triggered a wave of national reform. Now, about Hawkins. After the verdict, he was immediately stripped of his badge and pension. A federal inquiry uncovered not just misconduct, but collusion. Several senior officials in his department were quietly forced to resign. Internal affairs was gutted and rebuilt under independent oversight. The department's name was dragged through mud, but perhaps, at long last, was being scrubbed clean. Hawkins vanished from the public eye. No interviews, no apologies, no appearances. A local reporter tracked him down 6 months later, living in a trailer on the outskirts of the city. He declined to speak, just waved her away and shut the door. The man who once strutted into a courtroom with his chin high now couldn't show his face in a grocery store. And finally, Senator John Kennedy. The viral moment in the courtroom didn't define his career, but it certainly elevated it. People across the political spectrum praised him for his integrity, clarity, and restraint. Memes were made. Quotes went viral. College law classes even began studying his courtroom remarks as examples of spontaneous legal rhetoric. But Kennedy himself downplayed it. In a rare interview, he said, "I didn't do anything special. Just didn't let a lie walk out of a courtroom without a fight. The hero is Marcus. I just showed up. That humility is exactly why the moment stuck. Because sometimes it's not about fiery speeches or grandstanding. Sometimes it's about being present, being decent, and using your voice when it counts. In the end, this wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a turning point. A racist insult tried to derail justice, and instead, it exposed a network of abuse, launched a national conversation, and changed lives forever. One arrogant moment, one quiet response, one gavel drop, and a system shaken into action. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it speaks in a southern drawl. Land v. Whole country listens.